Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report News Hour. We're now in the 16th year of Changi, the 10th month now, and the second day by the heavenly calendar. Yesterday was True Children's Day. It was the first day of the 10th month. And I hope everyone had a wonderful True Children's Day, 66th in the series that Father began in 1960. Yes, praise God. So we will continue to celebrate these holy days. And the next one, we will have, next one actually is True God's Day. That's the next celebration, and that will, of course, be on the first day of the first month of the 17th year of Changi, and that on the Gregorian calendar, the one that most people use around the world, that's going to fall on February 17th. So we still have a few months to go before we get there. All right, and the spirit world is very, very active around these holy days. There's sort of a crescendo that builds up towards the holy day. And I think this morning's news probably reflects that. But anyway, before we get there, let's get something from Father in the World Scripture, Volume 2. And right now, it led me to chapter 20. Chapter 20, the very last paragraph in chapter 20. Chapter 20 is titled, what is this? 20장 3회, society. Okay, right, that's the title of chapter 20. And the very last quotation from Father here in chapter 20, he's speaking here September 10th, 1962. And this is from volume 12 of the 615 volume series of True Father's sermons. 역사는 하나의 세계를 지향하고 있기 때문에, so because history is going in the direction of one world, 가정민족 국가를 위하는 것은 다 지나가 버립니다. Everything for the sake of the individual family, ethnic group, and nation will all pass away. 하나님은 여러분에게 세계적인 표준 존재에게 붙여 주십니다. God will attach you, will engraft you onto an existence that has a global global objective, global standard, I guess, global standard. So yes, Father is a globalist, but hold on, no, he's a bottom-up globalist, not a top-down globalist, and that's the important difference between God and Satan. God is always bottom-up, right? Starting with the individual and working his way up. Whereas the archangel, he doesn't want to mess with that because he knows that if he just controls Adam, right, just controls the top of the pyramid, he can control everything. And so that's the difference between the two. So Father is a bottom-up globalist. 그것은 영원히 남아줄 수 있는 기준을 바라보고 사는 여러분을 만들기 위해서입니다. So when God is doing that, when He's attaching us to an existence that has a global standard, it is because He wants us to become people uh, who aspire to a standard that can remain eternally. Aspire to a standard that remains eternally. Praise God. Yes. So that's a wonderful quotation that we have this morning. When there's so much going on, like the back and forth in Washington D.C. and so forth and so on. All of that really, when you look at it from a global perspective, it kind of pales. I know people, especially the people inside the Beltway, people in Washington D.C., it's a life or death matter. And sometimes it gets very personal. For many people, I was recently talking with someone who lives in the Washington, D.C. area. And this person is not employed by the government. This person works for a private corporation. But she was telling me that just in her neighborhood, a large percentage of the people are working for the government, and so it's just during the shutdown, people were not getting paid, and it just felt so they just really feel the sort of the oppressive sort of atmosphere. People were sort of down. People were down because obviously because the bills keep coming in, the revenue does not. So you can understand why people would feel that way. But when you move away from it, and you look at it more globally, then it's a pretty small thing that is happening. I think always local situations appear a lot worse, though, when you're not in there but outside it. Um, but we need to always have that global perspective and be looking at it globally. Which so Father would send us around the world, right? He would send us to many places. Of course, he sent out missionaries also after the fall of the Soviet Union. He sent people um, to the Soviet Union to educate people, and I know there was some workshops going on there on the Black Sea coast, maybe in what is today Ukraine, and uh, things were really very interesting. Things are always very interesting in Father's Providence because he works from that global perspective. All right, let's go to what is going on. And as I said, the news today is maybe one of those days you don't want to get up, um, just stay in bed. Yeah, a lot of stuff going on, and um, especially uh, get this out of the way. If you are invested in Bitcoin, especially, you may want to just close your eyes. Things are pretty wild on the Bitcoin front this morning. It have been the past few days, but especially this morning. Anyway, all right, let's take a look at this story. Um, because things are heating up between China and Japan. I haven't really covered this until now, but I think it's time we took a look at this and thought about it. The real reason, okay, wait, this keeps changing on me. Okay. The real reason behind China's fury towards Japan's Takaichi, of course, Takaichi is the Takaichi Sanae, the new prime minister of Japan. And we knew from the outset, and everybody knew from the outset, that she is conservative, that she was a protege of a former Prime Minister Abe. And Abe was a conservative, very close with President Trump. And so Takaichi is the same, although I think maybe she lacks a little bit of the sort of the finesse of Abe, perhaps. And so recently she was asked a question in the parliament, and uh, someone asked her, "Well, what are you going to do? What would you do if China were to attack Taiwan?" And she said, "Well, you'll see in the article," but and she gave the hint that Japan might intervene militarily in such a situation. So China is very upset about that, or say that that's what they're upset about. But CNN here, this uh, writer for CNN, is trying to dig in a little bit deeper than that. And I think they do. I think that this person does a good job. So let's take a look at what they're saying. Weeks into the job, Japan's new leader has come face to face with what it means to cross China's red line on Taiwan. In the days since Sanae Takaichi suggested her country could respond militarily if China were to move to take control of Taiwan by force, Beijing has pulled out its economic pressure playbook, warning its citizens against travel and study there, suggesting there will be no market in China for Japan's seafood exports, and unleashing a wave of wall to wall nationalist fervor pointed at the prime minister. And as I think I mentioned a couple of days ago, China always likes to bring up the point that it has a large population. And in the past, of course, it has used that large population to lure Japanese and Western businessmen into China. Hey, look, if you can sell 1 billion pieces of your product for $1 a piece, then you got $1 billion. That kind of logic China has promoted in the past. And they've also done the opposite. South Korea, as I mentioned a couple of days ago, was also at the sort of the losing end of this at one point, where South Korea did something that China didn't like, and so China said, "Okay, no more tourists for you, no more tourists for you." Okay, and now Japan is sort of on the same in the same situation. Okay, oh, your prime minister said something we don't like. No more tourists for you. No more students for you. Okay, and also Japan exports a lot of seafood to China, and that export went down considerably after the 2000 and what was it 2011, right? 2011 um, March situation where the nuclear reactor in Sendai or near Sendai blew up as after following an earthquake and tsunami, and there was a lot of probably unfounded fear of pollution of seafood exports from Japan. Um, and so China was boycotting or refusing to receive Japanese seafood exports for a long time. Recently, just the last several weeks, actually, China reversed that decision and they were accepting seafood exports again. But now we have this situation. So, oh, no, on second thought, we don't like what you said about Taiwan. So we agreed to accept your exports. That is true. But you know what? There's not going to be a market for them because people are free to make their own choices. Using air quotes here on the word free in China. Don't you love it when totalitarian dictators try to use the word free? Anyway, and then and also wall-to-wall nationalist fervor pointed at the prime minister. Okay, well, there are plenty of anti-Japanese movies in the libraries of Chinese television stations, which they can pull out whenever it is necessary. You know, we used to have the same thing or something similar in Korea during the Tunduan Fifth Republic days, when Tunduan would get in trouble politically, he would also pull out the anti-Japanese card, and the card is there because, well, Japan kind of put it there, didn't they? So they have only themselves to blame in a sense. Anyway, the fear appears calibrated carefully to send a warning to Japan and other countries in the region of what could happen if they even consider taking a stance at odds with China on Taiwan, the self-ruled democratic island that Beijing claims as its own territory. And we'll see what this author says. But the spat, let me maybe increase this size for a bit. But the spat, which shows no sign of abating roughly 2 weeks on, also reveals something else: Beijing's deep seated concerns about the potential for changing military postures in Asia as US allies ramp up defense spending and coordination in face of its own rising military might. And in face of China's rising military might, that's true, but also in face of the US pulling back, or the US saying, hey, you know what? We've been supporting our allies for a long time, but now it's time for our allies to do more of their own defense. And this is something that Kuk Jinim was talking about already 2011, 2012. He was going around Korea and Japan, actually, also um, making the point to military leaders and political leaders that, listen, you cannot depend on the United States forever, and that China is rising, and he was telling the South Koreans, North Korea is not your actual enemy. China is your actual enemy. That's the one you need to be watching out for. And also, he was telling the Japanese as well, you need to be watching out for China, and you need to be preparing your own defense. And he was making the point that he was not talking so much about China's rising military power, but he was talking about the U.S. as pulling back relatively from what it has been doing in East Asia. No other country piques those concerns like Japan, whose imperial army in the 20th century invaded, occupied, and waged atrocities on China, and decades earlier colonized Taiwan, key points in China's so-called century of humiliation at the hands of foreign powers. Now, this sentence is a little bit misleading because China, whether or not China in other words, the imperial dynasty and also nationalist China following the Qing dynasty, whether they actually controlled Taiwan or not prior to the Japanese moving in, that's a that's open to discussion. So that particular point may not be, I think, a part of the century of humiliation, but primarily when we refer to the century of humiliation, we're talking about the concessions in Shanghai, for example, or the uh, Russia taking territory from China and Northeast. For example, Vladivostok, that used to be a Chinese city. It used to belong to China. That whole area around there used to belong to China. China had a coast um, on the sea there, but today it does not have a coast on the sea there. Anti-Japanese sentiment has simmered in the country since that time, flaring up and gaining traction in recent years, with nationalist hardliners' voices becoming increasingly mainstream in China under a strongman leader Xi Jinping. Strongman leader. Authoritarian dictator. Okay. Authoritarian dictator, strong man. Come on. What is he doing? Is he doing what do you call this? The arm wrestling? Is he doing arm wrestling? It's a strong man leader. Is he lifting weights? No. He's an authoritarian dictator, all right? Reinforcing the ruling Communist Party's long-standing determination to ensure history can never repeat itself, she has rapidly modernized China's military and grown its global influence. I think that sentence kind of glosses over the real motivation. Remember, the motivation of the Chinese Communist Party is always one. There's only one motivation: maintain power and control of the Chinese Communist Party. And they do this because they realize that this is something that they can sell to uh, the population. Always, the governing class in any country, the governing class is in a minority, but especially in a communist country like China, the Communist Party is always in a minority, and they do so kind of on purpose. They want only sort of they want it to be a status symbol to be a member of the Communist Party. And so in China, my understanding, less than 10% of the Chinese population is actually a member of the Chinese Communist Party. So because they're in a minority, they have to justify the fact that they are in control. Why are you in control? Who died and made you king, right? And so the Communist Party for a long time was saying, since Deng Xiaoping in the early 1980s was saying, okay, we're in control. You allow us to be in control because we're making you rich. And then people said, okay, yeah, we like that. That's fine. But then more recently, that hasn't been working so well because the Chinese economy isn't all that good. So now the Chinese Communist Party is saying, well, yeah, century of humiliation. Yeah, uh, we are establishing China as a restricted country throughout the world. And again, most people are saying, well, okay, that sounds good. We'll give up our freedom for that. Yeah, you can go ahead and control our movements and focus on the social credit system whenever we do something that you don't like. Okay, yeah, we'll stand for that. We'll endure that. Always, people are willing to give up freedom for all sorts of things. I remember during the 1980s, when the U.S. State Department was really pressuring Korea to grant more freedoms to its population, people, or when the statement was complaining about human rights, I would often hear people say, "Oh, well, the most important human right is the right to be safe." And of course, they were referring to the possibility of North Korean invasion. And they were saying, okay, well, yes, but we understand what the U.S. State Department is saying, but the current military dictatorship, Chun Doo-hwan and others, are protecting us from North Korea. So therefore, it's okay. They can go ahead and do what they're doing. Unfortunately, people are too willing to give up their freedom, and that has been shown to be true again and again and again. So they're not. So the Chinese Communist Party is not saying, we better make sure that history doesn't repeat itself. No, they're saying, let's convince the people of China that we are not going to let history repeat itself, because and by doing so, we protect the power and authority of the Chinese Communist Party. And eventually, it comes down to that. That eventually comes down to that. All right. So now, in Beijing's eyes, Takaichi's comments reveal that Japan does not respect the vast rebalancing of power that's positioned China as an ascendant superpower, and that it has military ambitions that could threaten China's rise. For the first time, a Japanese leader has expressed ambitions for armed intervention in Taiwan and issued a military threat against China, a commentary in the Communist Party mouthpiece People's Daily said earlier this week. Behind this lies the dangerous attempt by Japan's right-wing forces to break free from the constraints of the pacifist constitution and seek a status of a military power. So, speaking of the pacifist uh, constitution, where did I have it? I had it all pulled up and everything here. Where did it go? Oh my goodness. Okay. What happened to it? All right, let's pull it up again. Okay. So after World War II, some of you may not realize that Japan was under military occupation by the United States and allies, but basically by the United States for 7 years, from 1945 to 1952. Hey, where have you heard that range of dates before? That's right. That's when Father said that if everything had gone right, he could have established a Cheonryuk between 1945 and 1952. Anyway, General MacArthur in the beginning, and then he was later replaced, but in the beginning, General Douglas MacArthur was basically a dictator of Japan. And one of the things they did, in fact, one of the first things they did was to force Japan, well, yeah, strongly encourage, anyway, to adopt a new constitution. Japan until then had a Meiji constitution. It was called the Meiji Constitution. It was adopted during the Meiji era, and it had a separation of powers. It had a legislature, and it had an executive, and it had a judiciary. But the emperor was also in the constitution, and the emperor had a considerable authority in the constitution. And uh, the people, the Americans who went into Japan, decided, and the Allies, I guess, others too, decided that this constitution was a problem, that Japan needed to have another constitution that would say these things here. And this is a translation of Article 9 of the constitution that was adopted then and has never been amended. It has never been amended. So this is what it says today. Article 9 consists of two main paragraphs. The Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes. Two, prohibition of military forces. To achieve the aims of the first paragraph, Japan will not maintain land, sea, or air forces, nor any other war potential. The right of belligerency of the state will not be recognized. So does Japan today not have a military? It has one of the strongest militaries in the world. It has a very powerful military. But you say, well, wait a second, this constitution is still in effect. How can it have this constitution and also have a military? Well, this is why I often say the constitution of a country says whatever the Supreme Court of that country says it says. And in the United States, we saw this in 1973. The Supreme Court said, "Hey, the Constitution says abortion is okay." Now, the word abortion never appears in the U.S. Constitution, but still, the Supreme Court said that. And so then, from 1973, abortion was legal throughout the United States. Then in 2023, the Supreme Court said, "Oh, we changed our mind." Different set of judges, of course. The Constitution does not say abortion is legal. So then from that point, abortion became not legal again. So essentially, Japan is an excellent example of how you can amend the Constitution without actually amending it. This Constitution has never been amended. And these two paragraphs are in full force that Japan will not maintain land, sea, or air forces nor any other war potential. That's the law of the land. And yet they have a very strong military. Why? Oh, yes, right of self-defense. And so it's not called a military. It's not called a military. It's called the self-defense force. They have a land self-defense force. They have a sea self-defense force. They have an air self-defense force. Okay, not a military. Don't call it a military. Yes, they have guns. Yes, they have bullets. Yes, they have fighter planes. Advanced fighter planes. Yes, but just don't call it a military. uh, so this is that's the world we live in, right? That's the world we live in. So uh, God must be sitting up there. Sometimes you just can't believe it. He's one of these people. Hey, listen, God, you gave us creativity, all right? You gave us creativity, and we are using it to the fullest extent in order to justify our own sin. But you gave it to us, so don't give us too much problem over this. Okay. All right. So Japan supposedly does not have war-making capabilities, but China realizes that Japan, in fact, does have war-making capabilities, and so they are at least they are able to use that fear that the Chinese people have in order to maintain their own power and authority. Remember, love? Well, I said love or sex sells, yes, but fear also sells as much or perhaps even more than sex. And so especially people who are in power, the people who are in the elite class like to use fear of an external enemy, or obviously, or even fear of a societal breakdown in order to justify their actions. Japan has made a sweeping shift in its security posture in recent years, veering away from the pacifist constitution imposed on it by the United States in the aftermath of World War II to boost its defense budget and acquire counter-strike capabilities. And by the way, the United States has been pressuring Japan to do exactly this for not just Trump, but way before that. That's come as Beijing has ramped up its military activities in the region, including around Taiwan, and as the US has pushed its allies for more burden sharing on defense spending. Previous Japanese leaders avoided discussing Taiwan in the context of a military response, but politicians, particularly among right wingers in Takaichi's party, are increasingly wary of the implications of Tokyo if Beijing attacks Taiwan, which sits strategically to Japan's south. The sentiment has resulted in a growing impetus to further expand Japan's defense spending and even change the constitution. And by the way, um, when I was in Taiwan recently, accompanying the king as he went to various places, at one point I was at a place on the east coast of Taiwan where on a clear day, you could see the closest Japanese island. I think it's called a Yonaguni Island. And when I happened to be there, it was kind of hazy and I couldn't see it, but there was a sort of a what do you call it? A signboard there that said that okay, that's the direction. And on a clear day, you can see Yonaguni. Uh, and so Taiwan is relatively close to Japan, and so obviously Japanese territory would come under direct military threat from China if Taiwan were to fall. If China were to establish military bases in Taiwan, then Japan would be very concerned about the implications for the southern part of its island chain that goes all the way down almost to Taiwan. Now, Takaichi, a hawkish figure who has previously drawn Beijing's ire for questioning some of the narratives around Imperial Japan's culpability for its war atrocity, has taken the step of speaking plainly on the Taiwan issue. So this questioning some of the narratives around Imperial Japan's culpability, I mentioned this before, but according to the right or conservatives in Japan, such as Takaichi, I'm sure, the Nanjing massacre never occurred. Okay, and also Japan, when it attacked all these Asian countries, was actually the good guy because they were actually freeing Asia from Western colonialism. That's the conservative line in Japan, and I suspect Takaichi holds that as well. That's common among conservatives. And of course, Korea, China, you know, Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, they don't agree with that. They say, well, that's not how we saw it. But they were, and Japan went in and they tried to make everybody Japanese, and that did not go over very well at all. Um, so Taiwan for the first time. So also called for closer security ties with the U.S. and is moving to accelerate the country's defense buildup. And there she is in Parliament. She's answering questions. In Beijing's eyes, according to a social media account linked to the Chinese military, such efforts run the risk of seeing the ghost of militarism reemerge to wreak havoc in the world. And is Japanese militarism really on the rise? I think not. I think civilian control over the military is far stronger today than it was in the pre-war years, in the 1920s and 30s. Um, Japan did have a period of a democracy during the 1910s and 20s. Then that gradually shifted into military dictatorship. Um, but today, the tradition of civilian control has been firmly established, and so I would say that China is, or the Chinese Communist Party is uh, exaggerating the threat of the reemergence of a Japanese militarism. But they do that because this is what they can sell to their people in order to maintain the power and control of the Chinese Communist Party. It always goes back to this, okay, power and control, the Chinese Communist Party. That's where it always goes back to. And that's why some of the Japanese side feel that Beijing is lashing out now to box Takaichi in and put her on the back foot early on, so she will be more reluctant to push forward on Japan's investment in defense, according to Chong Jalan, an associate professor at the National University of Singapore. Japanese troops killed more than 200,000 unarmed civilians during its occupation and raped and tortured tens of thousands of women and girls in what is now known as the Nanjing Massacre, one of the most notorious wartime atrocities of the 20th century. Japan has repeatedly apologized and expressed more remorse for its wartime atrocities. But like I said, the conservatives in Japan say that actually Nanjing massacre never happened and that the whole thing was made up as propaganda by the Communist Party and also by the Kuomintang Nationalist Party, and and they claim to have evidence that shows that it did not happen. So anyway, that's a controversial thing that goes on, but it's a anyway, what this paragraph says is kind of the accepted, shall we say, history of well, it's the accepted history. Okay. That era, however, has been front and center in China this year as Beijing marks the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, when Japan surrendered to Allied forces, freed China from its occupation, and saw Taiwan handed over to the nationalist-run Chinese government. The Chinese Communist Party established the People's Republic of China in 1949 after emerging victorious from a civil war, while the defeated nationalists retreated to Taiwan. Beijing has used the anniversary to justify its claim to the island and broadcast concern about what it sees as Japan's turn toward militarism. And China sees taking control of Taiwan as a core piece of the national rejuvenation that it must complete by mid-century, a goal that, if Beijing decides must be achieved by force, could be heavily complicated by a stronger Japan. And this issue of will China actually attack Taiwan is often discussed by many people, and there are many who say that, well, they're not really going to attack Taiwan because there are a lot of negatives. They will be uh, criticized by world opinion, and they'll probably have to endure economic sanctions if they do that. and so forth and so on. So they'll probably not do that. This is one opinion, and actually, you know what? Um, it's true. However, remember when me and many others were saying that, hey, Putin's never going to attack Ukraine. He's not going to really do a full invasion of Ukraine because there are all these negatives, and we listed the negatives, right? And you know what? We were right. It was a bad idea. It was a bad idea for Putin to attack Ukraine, but he didn't listen to it. So, and so to say that it would be a bad idea for China to attack Taiwan, it's absolutely right. That is true. But will Xi Jinping listen to us? Probably not. But China, of course, as I've pointed out, is taking sort of their plan A is to infiltrate various aspects of Taiwan society, and they've been quite successful in many ways. The Kuomintang, which was the losing party in the Civil War against the Chinese Communist Party, and so the party that you would expect would be very anti-communist, right? We lost and we want to get back at them. They're actually the most pro CCP party in China, in Taiwan. And they're the ones that are always saying, let's not poke the bear or the dragon. Let's be friends with Beijing, so that they don't attack us, and so forth. Let's not do anything foolish. Whereas the current party in power in Taiwan is saying that we are independent, we are a separate country, and we're going to uh, stress that independence. Uh, Now, China, Xi Jinping has said that, Chinese Communist Party is very patient, and as long as they feel that they're making progress towards a peaceful absorption of Taiwan, and that's what I would call it, an absorption, they probably will say, well, let's give it another year, let's give it another 5, let's give it another 10 years. On the one hand, we're succeeding in infiltrating Taiwan. On the other hand, U.S. Military force is declining. And so, time is on our side. Let's give it more time. That argument within the CCP may have influence, but a certain point may come where Xi Jinping will say, or others will say, you know what? People are starting to doubt our commitment to bring Taiwan into the fold. We promised them that we're going to do this, and now they're doubting our credibility. So we have to show that we are actually credible. We have to show that we actually meant it when we said it. And so we understand the negatives. We understand that there's going to be economic isolation, but we've prepared for that. We've got this whole stockpile of gold, all right? We got this stockpile of gold, and we got countries around the world that will support us. And I know the United States and probably Europe as well. But hey, they're already past tense, and so we don't have to worry about them. But we got all the countries in Africa. We've got all the country. We got a lot of countries in South America, and we got other countries around the world that are going to be on our side. So let's go ahead and do it. So then push the button and just start the attack. That also is possible. So we don't know which what the outcome is going to be. But either way, Taiwan appears to be on a course to become communist. Uh, Either way, the effort to infiltrate Taiwan society is moving forward. You can see that, and uh, if left to its own devices, it will probably succeed. It's just that will it succeed in a short enough time frame to satisfy the CCP's desire to shore up its credibility with its people? That's the question, I think. So anyway, that's what is going on there. And then what would Japan do? Right? What would Japan do in that kind of situation? Uh, Japan will at least have to militarize its southernmost islands, Yonaguni and Ishigaki, Iriomote, these islands that are down there, uh, just off the coast of Taiwan, really. where Yonaguni is actually in sight of Taiwan on a clear day. Okay. All right, so that's what's going on there. Okay. Now let's see here. Okay, we got that. Um, okay, well, so let's talk about Ukraine. Let's talk about Ukraine. So President Trump, you know, inspired by his own success, or at least temporary, short-term success in Gaza, and bringing sort of at least a short-term peace there, is now trying to apply that template to Ukraine. And so he came up with 28 points, and he's submitted it to Zelensky. And uh, now we have Zelensky's reaction to that. And let's look at the Trump proposal first. So this is the full read of that. I don't know if we want to read the whole thing. Okay, wait a second. This thing is, I'm going to have to bring this down again. Yeah, I'm sorry. This ad on the right here is covering it if I expand it. Ukraine's President Zelensky met with senior U.S. Army figures in Kiev on Thursday after reports that Washington, D.C. had presented a plan to Ukraine to end the war with Russia that would be more favorable to Moscow. The British newspaper Telegraph was among outlets that revealed the details of the 28-point plan, which will be pored over by world leaders. Newsweek has contacted the Ukrainian and Russian foreign ministries for comment. Okay, and then here. The deal demands that Ukraine cut its military to 600,000 and give up missiles that can strike Moscow. Kiev would also be prohibited from invading Russia or using force to reclaim lands that have been seized by Russia. Ukraine would have to give up its NATO aspirations, would not be able to station foreign fighter jets in its territory. But the deal also pledges decisive military action against Russia and the reintroduction of sanctions if it attacks Ukraine once again. The plan would also give Russia the Donbas region, comprised of Luhansk and Donetsk, which contain Ukraine's strongest fortifications. Ukrainian leaders have consistently refused to cede unoccupied territory under any circumstances. Even before the plan's details were revealed, critics saw it as pushing for Kiev to capitulate to Moscow. Military history expert David Silby from Cornell University told Newsweek that it was aimed at pressuring Zelensky and would be a non-starter for Ukrainians. While Ukraine is slowly losing the war, the situation isn't so bad now that the country has to give up what the plan demands, including a substantial amount of land, a shrinking of the military, and various other highly constrictive requirements, he said. Right. So the 28 peace plan is Ukraine's first, number one, sovereignty will be confirmed, Ukraine's sovereignty confirmed. Okay, and then comprehensive and some problem with the language there. Anyway, non-aggression agreement will be concluded between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe. All ambiguities of the last 30 years will be considered settled. It is expected that Russia will not invade neighboring countries and NATO will not expand further. A dialogue will be held between Russia and NATO, mediated by the United States, to resolve all security issues and create conditions for de-escalation in order to ensure global security and increase opportunities for cooperation and future economic development. And Ukraine will receive reliable security guarantees. The size of the Ukrainian armed forces will be limited to 600,000 personnel. Ukraine agrees to enshrine in its constitution that it will not join NATO, and NATO agrees to include in its statutes a provision that Ukraine will not be admitted in the future. NATO agrees not to station troops. NATO agrees not to station troops in Ukraine. European fighter jets will be stationed in Poland. And the guarantees, the U.S. will receive compensation for the guarantee. If Ukraine invades Russia, it will lose the guarantee. If Russia invades Ukraine, in addition to a decisive coordinated military response, all global sanctions will be reinstated, recognition of the new territory, and all other benefits of this deal will be revoked. If Ukraine launches a missile at Moscow or St. Petersburg without cause, the security guarantee will be deemed invalid. Ukraine is eligible for EU membership and will receive short-term preferred access to the European market while this issue is being considered. A powerful global package of measures to rebuild Ukraine, including but not limited to the creation of a Ukrainian development fund to invest in, oh yeah, here BlackRock is here, a Ukraine development fund to invest in fast growing industries, including technology, data centers, and artificial intelligence. The United States will cooperate with Ukraine to jointly rebuild, develop, modernize, and operate Ukraine's gas infrastructure, including pipelines and storage facilities. Joint efforts to rehabilitate war affected okay, extraction of minerals. Okay. World Bank will develop a special financing package, and Russia will be reintegrated into the global economy. The lifting of sanctions will be discussed and agreed upon in stages and on a case-by-case basis. Okay, and then the U.S. will enter into an economic, uh, and Russia will be invited to join the G8. Again, remember they were members of the G8 for a few years, but then they were kicked out after after they invaded Ukraine. And frozen funds will be used as follows. Okay, so a joint American-Russian working group on security issues will be established. Okay, this goes on and on and on. And so this historian that we just read about says, well, this is basically, a victory for Russia. And he says that things are not so bad that Ukraine will have to accept this right now. Uh, and that may be true, but if it's inevitable that Ukraine is going to have to accept it at some point in the future, wouldn't it be a better idea for them to go ahead and accept it now, and effectively or indirectly save the lives of thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people on both sides in the interim? Anyway, we'll see what happens here. But I see. I was going to do the Ukrainian reaction to. Okay, so here, Ukraine's reaction. Ukraine's reaction here. Okay, Russia expected not to invade. Okay, we got that. Zelensky, we are ready for constructive, honest, and swift work. Hmm, interesting. Constructive, honest, and swift work. So that's not a no. That sounds like Zelensky is accepting that Ukraine is not going to win this war, and they're better off accepting this deal. It sounds like ready for constructive, honest, and swift work. Unless, of course, he figures that there's some sort of a thing that's going to, as they get into the details, that he'll have plenty of opportunities to resist and uh, not agree to it. And perhaps right now he cannot say no, because if he were to say no, then he would lose U.S. support. Maybe that's the reason for this rather surprisingly, can I say, timid response. Hmm. Maybe as time goes on, we'll see what he means by constructive, honest, and swift work. Okay. All right, so that's going on in Ukraine. Um, let's see, and now let's go to this one here. I was asking the question: will Mamdani's election in New York, will that serve as a warning to Americans, sort of a scare them straight, so that socialism cannot gain a foothold anyplace else in America, and New York itself will eventually reject socialism? Or will it be a cancer that grows and grows and grows? And it looks like the second of those options may be the case, because now Seattle has also put in someone, a socialist, as a mayor. And this Seattle mayor apparently is even worse than Mamdani. And by the way, uh, Trump is meeting Mamdani today in the White House, which should be an interesting conversation. There should like to be a fly on the wall on that one. The elections of Zoran Mamdani in New York City and Katie Wilson in Seattle intensified the national debate as socialist influenced agendas returned to two of the country's most visible city halls, raising concerns among conservative economists and historians who say earlier American attempts at collective governance repeatedly failed due to high costs and weakened incentives. Oh, and look at that. They want us to pay money. This is Newsmax. Come on. I guess. All right. Okay. All right. Newsmax. No, I'm not going to give you my money. Okay. But anyway, let's we'll watch this unfold, I'm sure. All right. Let's look at Breitbart, see what's going on there. Mamdani era has already begun. Pro-Palestinian activists besiege New York City synagogue. Yeah. Okay. That's right. This is what you guys voted for. In Pennsylvania, the place where Car Arms is located is a village called Greeley, Pennsylvania. And actually, most of you, even if you went to the Ride Around Freedom Festival show, probably did not actually see the village of Greeley. To get to the village of Greeley, you go east along that road and you cross, what is it, US, what is it, Highway, what was it, 6 or something like that? And then you go a little more, and then you come to a village. And that's actually where Greeley is. And Greeley is named after Horace Greeley, who was a journalist, a famous journalist in the 19th century. And after he retired, he became a part of a socialist commune, and that was located in the general area where Greeley, Pennsylvania, is located today. And during the 19th century, there were a number of experiments like that around the United States with socialism, with a sort of collective governance, and they all failed. And even in the 1960s, of course, we had the hippie communes, and the idea. And I never went there. But the idea, as I understood, the hippie communes was that uh, we share everything, and to everyone according to his need, and from everyone according to his ability. That kind of socialist ideology, and that never works, because what you wind up with, as the Pilgrim Fathers found out, when they first got to Americas, is that the people who work hard turn around and say, "Hey, wait a second, you know, you're taking from us everything that we can produce, and then you're giving it to people who are just lying on their backs and doing nothing because, oh yeah, from everyone according to their ability and everyone according to their need. They say, oh, I need this, and so they just get it without having to work for it. So I don't like that. So I'm not gonna. I'm gonna lie on my back too. Oh, I've got a bad back. I've got a cold. You see that? So it is always failed in America, but people keep trying it, and they keep trying it because there are people who like centralized control, and they like the idea of being able to control what people consume or what people do. Now, in Israel, of course, the kibbutz may be an exception. There are a lot of kibbutzim that were actually successful. Um, and also in Japan and in Korea, there's something called the agricultural cooperative. And the way that works is that, in both countries, agricultural fields are actually very small. They're pretty small. And so it would not make sense for each person to have their own tractor. That just would not make economic sense. So they get together and the village, or under the name of the Agricultural Cooperative Association, will purchase one or how many ever tractors that the village as a whole requires for planting and for all the other tasks that are involved in agriculture, planting and harvesting and everything in between. And then also the sale uh, is also done by the cooperative. If you go to the palace in Korea now in Suncheon, that area is very famous for its cucumbers. And if you look out over the fields, you see a lot of greenhouses with these plastic covering. And my wife and I went walking in that area one day, and we noticed that people of the village, people of the village around the palace, were all in their own greenhouses, and these are their own greenhouses. They're responsible. Each family, or I guess it's a family, has maybe more than one greenhouse, maybe one. And they were in there at the time that we were there. They were all busy harvesting, and so they're picking the cucumber, putting them in boxes, putting the boxes outside by the side of the road. And then at a certain time, then a large truck, a semi trailer, would come by, and they would load those. And the boxes were marked, cucumbers of Nagwon Myeon is the name of the township. Nagwon cucumbers, and apparently Nagwon cucumbers are famous in Korea. And as we were walking by, one of the people came out and said, "Oh, thank you for coming, and we'd like to see you here. Here, take some of these cucumbers." And they gave us a whole bunch, not just one, but a whole bunch of cucumbers, which were very good, very juicy, and very good. So that's an example of kind of a cooperative effort, not socialist, because everybody has their private property, right? They own their own homes, they own their own. I guess the greenhouses, at least they're benefiting financially from those greenhouses, and they were all working very hard at doing that. So that I don't think is socialism. Socialism is, of course, when the government owns the means of production, or there's collective control of the means of production. And you might say, well, the tractor is the means of production, but people are invested in those tractors. They don't come free from the government. So there's a fine line there. And maybe New York would develop something like that. We'll have to see. And maybe Seattle though, is a pretty much of a basket case right now. But anyway, let's see what is going on with this situation before we run out of time with Mamdani's people attacking a synagogue here. Hundreds of pro-Palestinian activists besieged Manhattan's prestigious Park East synagogue on Wednesday night, chanting, "Globalize the Intifada, death to the IDF, and take another settler out," in what critics warned as just the beginning of a radicalized climate under socialist mayor-elect Zoran Mamdani. The nighttime demonstration targeted an event about Jewish immigration to Israel hosted inside the synagogue, which has stood on East 67th Street since 1890 and also houses a prominent Jewish day school. Organizers from Palo Alto, New York, and New Jersey, Within Our Lifetime, Jewish Voices for Peace, New York, and allied anti-Israel groups promoted the rally as No Settlers on Stolen Land, and a protest to stop the settler recruiting fair, branding the program as a settler recruiting event. Radical pro-Palestinian activists pounded drums and unleashed a barrage of incendiary chants, including "Resistance is glorious," "Intifada revolution," "No peace on stolen land," "We don't want no two states, we want 48," and "From New York to Gaza, why we want 48? What about Alaska and Hawaii?" I guess could have let them stay. "From New York to Gaza, globalize the Intifada," while signs declared Zionism is a death cult, "No settlers on stolen land." Attendees entering and exiting the building were jeered at close range, as one protest leader told the crowd, "It's our duty to make them think twice before holding these events. We need to make them scared," prompting activists to repeat the line. right. So, what do you call it when uh, people use violence in pursuit of political objectives? Well, terrorism is one word. Another word is fascism. This is exactly how fascism grew in Europe in the 1930s, in Germany and Italy and other places. These people claim that they are anti-fascist, but actually they are the perfect example of fascism. So we see that growing in New York, and we'll be seeing where it goes. All right, got to go for today. And what's today? Today's Friday, so I'll be here tomorrow again. God bless, Godspeed. May His kingdom come quickly.